Hey gang, Ed the Fed here. Welcome to the first episode of Season 3 of Nature's Secret Service. I want to thank each and every one of you for hanging in there as a fan and for doing whatever you can to help me grow the listener base. Before we get started, I want to make a correction for an error in a previous episode. Loyal listener Jeff H. from Wisconsin caught an error in the ambush episode of Season 2. In describing the area where Special Agent Vic Blazovic worked when he was ambushed and shot by duck poachers, I described Illinois as falling within the central flyway for migratory birds. Illinois actually falls within the Mississippi flyway. The central flyway is farther to the west. Great catch, Jeff, and thank you for taking the time to email me with that correction. Considering I was a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Special Agent and a really critical aspect of my job was protecting migratory birds, I felt pretty stupid for making that mistake, but I'm very happy to be correcting it now. All right, people, it's time for the premiere of Season 3, Wolves. Here we go. Okay, people, listen up. Here we go. This is Nature's Secret Service, the podcast that puts you in the room with the men and women of wildlife law enforcement. I'm your host, Ed Newcomer, and this is the first episode of Season 3, which, as I've told everybody, is completely devoted to wolf reintroduction and the many law enforcement cases that have resulted around the protection of wolves in the western United States. I thought today it would be best to start Season 3 with an interview with Rick McIntyre. Rick is probably one of the best known wolf ecologists, observers in the world. He's written many books about wolves, and he was nice enough to invite me to his home in Montana to record this very first episode of Season 3. Rick McIntyre, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Ed. And you can see the cabin here is a little on the modest side. It's I'm not one of those billionaires that moved to Montana.
I absolutely love it. This honestly, in some of your books, you have referenced your cabin here in Montana, and this is exactly how I pictured it, which is perfect. I would love to switch places with you, honestly.
No, thank you.
And let me just say, as an introduction, one of the things that really struck me, Rick, is that in one of your books, Jane Goodall actually does an introduction for you in one of your books. And she described you as the ultimate wolf guru. And I have to say, that's high praise from a woman who basically, changed the way we look at animal behavior and animal observations. That's pretty neat.
Yes. And to tell the truth, I don't even know what to put into words for that. I never really expected that. And it just totally blew me away. I mean, that's the person I respect most in the world. So what can I say? I'm very thankful, very humbled by it.
And it says a lot about you and your reputation in the, biology community, the community of biologists who are interested not just in wolves, but in, animal conservation, wildlife conservation all over the world.
Thank you.
Yeah. The reason that this will interest you, last summer, the reason I came up with the idea to do an entire season dedicated to wolves, last summer, my niece and we visited Yellowstone National Park. And on the way here, we listened to the book you wrote about Wolf 8. And we had it on audiobook, and we listened to it the whole time. And at some point while we were in the park looking for wolves ourselves, I said, I should do a whole episode about wolves. Mm-hmm. And I said to my niece, I wonder if I could get Rick McIntyre to be on the show. So this is a big deal for me. I'm a little starstruck, but I'm really glad to have you here. Tell us a little bit about how you got into watching wolves and documenting what wolves do. Where did you get your first experience with that?
Well, I'll start by saying I have a very different background than people like Dave Meach, Doug Smith, Mike Phillips, etc. I grew up in a rural part of Massachusetts, so I was outside all the time, fishing, watching animals, etc. And I was very influenced by Thoreau's book, Walden. I lived just down the road from Walden Pond. And I think I read that maybe when I was a junior in high school. And prior to that, I really didn't have much of an idea what to do for colleges, what major, what career. And that really helped me. And I didn't really know that much about what different majors there were in state colleges.
Right.
I was interested in going to what now is called University of Massachusetts Amherst. But they did have a forestry major, and that seemed to be maybe the closest to what Thoreau was doing. He wrote a lot about trees, just maybe less about wildlife. There's probably a lot of things that have been shot and killed already there. So I was a major in forestry, and then I was very lucky for 3 summers, starting after my freshman year, I worked for the Forest Service, U.S. Forest Service on the White Mountain National Forest in neighboring New Hampshire. So that's, I guess, where my outdoor resource management connected career began. And I'm still not sure how this happened. And in a way, it's not quite logical, but I got an offer to go to Alaska at Denali, and that was my first Park Service naturalist job. By that time, I'd already worked in some remote areas. The guy in charge, Bill Truesdell, the chief naturalist, he had already asked me, do you mind working in remote areas and living in remote areas? And I said, no, please, let me do that.
That's what you wanted
and he said,
to do.
Well, we have this visitor center. It's 66 miles out. It's Eielson Visitor Center. There's quarters in the basement. 1 naturalist is there and 1 maintenance worker. Would that work for you? Yeah, sign me up for that.
Nice.
So right away, even though I was a new guy, there was a big turnover that year. Even though I was a new guy, I was in this primo position. And that was the first summer that I saw wolves.
And you were working there as a naturalist.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So was your encounter with wolves there just, coincidental with you being a naturalist, or was you part of your job associated with the wolves?
Well, let's see. At that time, 1976, wolves were pretty hard to see.
Okay.
Whereas you pretty much could see grizzlies every day, moose, caribou, Dall sheep every day. So no offense to any of those animals.
Of course.
I wouldn't want to give offense to a grizzly bear.
Definitely not.
Wolves were in a whole different category.
Okay.
And so I remember I was in the visitor center in my ranger uniform, and there was a report of 2 wolves down the road, like 30 miles. And it happened to be a period in the afternoon where they didn't need me to be there. You may know in the Park Service, we have something called roving interpretation.
Right.
So that's when you're away from the visitor center, the campground, whatever. You go out to where the people are. And you're kind of like a street preacher, where you say, folks, come on over here, and we're going to do a talk on bears or whatever.
Right.
So it is valid to go to where the people are. So anyway, I got out there just in time to get a glimpse of 2 wolves. They were trying to get a moose calf. It was maybe only a few minutes, but I got to see wolves. And that was it for that year.
Wow.
Now, I ended up being there for 15 seasons.
Right.
And you may or may not be familiar with Gordon Haber. He was an independent wolf researcher back then. And so I got to know him. He gave me some tips on where to look. I got to know Dave Meach, who's considered the top wolf biologist in the world. And so over the years that I worked there, I gradually learned how to do better at finding wolves.
This might be a good place to talk about kind of the history of wolves in the U.S. and kind of where we were at that time, 1976, mid-70s. You were up in Denali in Alaska. There were wolves there. There still are wolves up there.
But in the lower 48 states, can you just kind of describe the situation that wolves were in the 70s and how they got there, just briefly?
Yeah, I actually did a lot of research on that in later years for some books that I was writing. When Europeans first came to North America, wolves were a very common animal. And as Europeans settled, starting with the East Coast, I came across a reference that I think it was in the 1600s, what is now New York City, the Dutch government, they controlled New York at that time, and the citizens were so worried about having wolves on Manhattan Island that they offered to pay you gold coins for every wolf that you killed in New York City.
Bounty in New York City on wolves.
So if they had wolves on Manhattan Island, there were wolves everywhere.
There were wolves everywhere. Exactly.
And I think it's fair to say by that time, certainly English people and most other folks from European countries, they couldn't conceive of a more backward place to civilize, a place that still had wolves, whereas they had already gotten rid of them.
Yeah, what you're describing is really like the very earliest stages of kind of European settlers' war on wolves. And once we became a country, the United States, that really became U.S. policy in the Western United States to destroy predators in general, but wolves in particular.
Yes. So to jump from Manhattan to places like Yellowstone is not that much of a jump. So both in Denali, here, all the major national parks that originally had wolf populations, even the national park rangers felt that the right thing to do was to kill them off. Now, if you, Ed, could go back and interview those rangers, they wouldn't be able to understand, well, why would you object to that?
Right.
Yeah. So I think the way to explain it is to them, their job was to protect the quote-unquote good animals.
Right.
The animals that people could make use of, could eat them, could use their pelts, etc. Even though Yellowstone hunting was prohibited, they still had the sense, we need to protect all these ungulates, these plant-eating animals. And so there was a big problem with poachers coming in at that time, particularly killing bison, because they could get a ton of money for a bison head and skull and everything. So it was the Wild West back then in Yellowstone, and those were extremely dangerous guys. So the rangers back then were big heroes. That should be at the Yellowstone show, not that.
I'm telling you, it's funny you say that, because on previous episodes of my podcast, we have talked about the earliest law enforcement officers in the U.S. for wildlife.
Yeah.
And it was a super dangerous job.
Yeah.
And a lot of them got killed and got in shootouts. And the wildlife, as you talk about the good animals, there, around the turn of the century, 1900, there was a huge market for them, for restaurants in the East Coast, where market animals, meat from elk and deer and bison and ducks and geese would end up commercialized. And it was causing widespread, destruction of our wildlife.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're right. I mean, the war on predators was really to protect some of those interests. But it was pretty pervasive. When was the last wolf in Yellowstone eliminated?
To get here, you likely drove past the spot. Do you remember Soda Butte Cone in Lamar Valley? The story, as we understand it, is in 1926, the local rangers that were stationed in that valley, I don't know if they deliberately shot a bison to lure the wolves in or if it died on its own, but they surrounded it with steel wolf traps. Whatever day it was, they came out, 2 wolves were trapped. They were shot and killed. And as far as we know, that was it.
1926 was the last wolves.
And one of the great things for us that know that background is we oftentimes see wolves very close to that rock that geothermal formation. Yeah, and that would be the Junction Butte Pack.
Interesting.
And for many years, the Crystal Creek Pack lived there, then the Druid Peak Pack, some of our most famous packs, most famous wolves. So, of course, none of those wolves know any of that history, but for us, it's really something.
What's your understanding? Yeah, I think 1926 is it's certain that's when we think wolves disappeared from Yellowstone. But, it's within 10 or 15 years of that either way that pretty much wolves were extirpated from the entire western U.S. with the exception of, small pocket in the Great Lakes area. What's your understanding of what happened in Yellowstone Park once wolves were eliminated?
Well, one thing for sure was that the elk population exploded in numbers.
Right.
And it's hard to believe this now, and because it seems such a strange thing. But when I started in here in '94, there was an older guy, ranger, who had retired, and he had worked in Yellowstone when he was younger. And he said, I guess it was back in the 60s, he was issued a rifle and was told, hey, whenever you have time, especially in the winter, just pull up along the side of the road and shoot and kill as many elk as you can.
Wow.
That was their program to alleviate what they acknowledged was an overpopulation of elk. And what I mean by that is, and you're probably familiar with this, they were doing a lot of damage to edible species such as aspen and willow.
Right.
And in my early years, I would take people on nature walks to a site where some of the first wolves were released in '95, the Crystal Creek Pack. And literally every one of those shoots had been browsed to death, every one of them.
Interesting.
And aspens don't live long. And so we were getting pretty close to the point where those elderly trees were dying. And if enough of them died, that's it. Period. There's no more aspens, at least in that place. So then within a few years, I would continue to either hike up there on my own or take people there. And there was just a dramatic transformation that now those shoots were surviving. And the last few times that I went up there, what I would have called shoots 10, 15 years ago, they're 20, 25 feet tall. And the growth is so dense, you can hardly walk through them. It's like a bamboo forest. And so aspen is a great food for all plant eating species, and of course good for beavers as well. Yeah.
That was one of the things that really struck me as I was kind of reading about the history of wolves here, in that I think one of the unintended consequences of the wolves coming and causing the elk to move brings the aspen back. Nobody expected beavers to just spontaneously return to the park.
Yes.
They weren't released or anything. They just showed up on their own, which is pretty neat.
Well, you think if you're a beaver and you're smarter than the average beaver. That's reference to who, Yogi Bear. Anyway, it's just an amazing story, conservation story that, in the big picture, just an example that we're slowly moving forward. We're slowly advancing in conservation and understanding how wild things work. Because I'm sure if you interviewed park rangers back in the 20s, everyone would have agreed, the right thing to do is let's get rid of all these wolves as fast as we can, and then we'll have more elk.
Right.
What could be wrong with that?
Right.
More elk, the better for everyone. By the way, there's this great story I found in my research. I think this was in the late 30s. The guy that was the chief naturalist at the time, I don't recall his name, he maybe had a bit of a better science background than most of the other rangers and naturalists. And after work, he would just walk around Mammoth, just stroll around. And there came a time where he began to notice things. It started with just a few elk that seemed to be sick, that seemed to be in decline, and then dying. And after a while, there were more elk that went through that, and then more elk and more elk. And it was some type of infectious disease. I'm not sure if they knew what it was.
Interesting. So they were starting to see the ramifications of the overpopulation.
Well,
as early as the 30s.
Here's the point of the story. He did. And there was some type of a science conference that came up, and it was based in Yellowstone. And so naturalists and rangers and superintendents from all over the country came here, and he was one of the scheduled speakers. And everything went well until he got up to speak. And he essentially said, I've been thinking about this. And he talked about how long he'd been in Yellowstone, talked about his life in the Mammoth area, talked about strolling around in the evening, seeing elk that had some type of a disease that he now realized was contagious, and how many elk had died from that contagious disease. And this was the point of his talk that just blew the room apart. He said, maybe if we hadn't killed off all the wolves, those sick elk would have been easy prey for the wolves. And if the wolves killed most of those initial sick elk, maybe then that infection wouldn't have spread. But at that time, what he said was so anathema, is that the word?
Yeah, right.
That
shocked everybody.
That he literally had to resign and leave.
Wow.
Yeah, they didn't want to hear that.
Wow.
So they had really bought into, hey, let's, we got to keep on. We had to kill the wolves, and several decades after that. Yeah, yeah.
That was the 30s, you said.
That was the late 30s. That's in that anthology I did, War Against the Wolf, with the guy's name.
One of your other books, too, referenced that, around mid-1940s, Aldo Leopold started to recommend bringing wolves back to Yellowstone. So I think you mentioned it was in your book, you mentioned it was 1946 was when Aldo Leopold first proposed it, I think.
Yes, and that was in a review of a wolf book that a U.S. Fish and Wildlife guy had written. I forget the name of that.
Okay.
Yeah, let's talk about Leopold for a moment. So, yes, he essentially said, maybe we should consider bringing wolves back to Yellowstone. I don't know that he used the word reintroduction, but he came up with the idea, and he was very highly respected. So this was maybe 8-10 years after the previous story where the guy was ridiculed. So he was very respected, and that, let's just say, lit a flame that it took some time, but it eventually caught on.
Yeah, and that's a good place to I think, jump forward a little bit in our story here, in that I think most of my listeners will know that in 1995, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Park Service collaborated to reintroduce wolves to Yellowstone. Finally, I want to use that 50 years after Aldo Leopold proposed it again. And interestingly, one of the things I loved about reading your books is you kind of, I don't know if you remember this because you've written so many books, but you actually tell the story of how Aldo Leopold, as a young ranger, actually killed a wolf in New Mexico, I believe, and lived to regret it,
Yes, he famously said as he walked up to the dying wolf, he saw a bright, it's very emotional to tell the story.
It's emotional to read it.
Yeah, in the eyes of the wolf, and then it died.
Yeah.
And that's in his essay, Thinking Like a Mountain.
Right.
And he was, I'm sure you know, a wildlife professor. And he was very, very influential. And so he played a big, big role in starting to turn the tide on acceptance of wolves and to see their value. But in that original essay, he in a way that anyone could understand it, not in an academic way, he talked about killing off all the wolves mean we're going to have a lot more deer, and deer in that particular, I think it was part of Arizona. And having too many deer is a bad thing.
Right.
And he talked about the damage that they did to eating too much of the vegetation, like we've been talking about with the elk here. So he could really see the big picture. And I think that's a really good way to phrase this, that the story about the Park Service guy here that had to quit because all of his peers could not see the big picture. They were not ready to see the big picture.
Yeah, not ready to see it.
So he was ahead of his time by too many years. And but I like to tell that story because to give him credit for that.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. So this is actually good because now let's jump ahead to 1995. You've been working seasonally in Denali for 15 years now and have had a lot of experience observing wolves up there. How is it you came to Yellowstone National Park in mid-90s?
I was well aware that they were looking at bringing wolves back. Back then, my winter job was on the Rio Grande River at Big Bend National Park. And so I called up here. And I had always worked, except for being a firefighter in my first year, my Park Service jobs were always as a seasonal naturalist. So I called the chief naturalist office here, ended up speaking to the assistant chief naturalist, Tom Tankersley. And if you're a Park Service person, it's easy to talk to other Park Service person. You know, you guys.
Fish and wildlife's the same.
We're all the same.
Yeah, exactly. You speak the same language. You kind of know. Yeah.
And so, right away he understood that I had 16 seasons worth of experience being around wolves.
Yeah.
And all of those jobs were essentially doing public programs, working with the public, being a naturalist, etc. And I had reinstatement status due to a brief permanent federal job with the Forest Service. So he was in a position where, because of that, he could just hire me right off the bat. He didn't have to check the register. And so we agreed that, yes, he would bring me on for the summer of '94. I would be called the wolf interpreter. And my job would be, everything I did would be on wolves. The big campfire programs with 400 people, nature walks, everything all about wolves. And it was an easy thing for me to figure out, well, here's how I'm going to do that. It's the most natural thing in the world for me to spend my whole summer every day in my ranger uniform talking to people and explaining the wolf reintroduction. And then on January 12th of '95, I wasn't working in the winters back then, but a stock trailer arrived in Yellowstone. It stopped just down the road from where we are now. And wolves from two different packs were in the trailer. The Crystal Creek pack, there were 4 members, the parents, the alpha male, the alpha female, and 4 male pups. And then the other 3 cages had the original members of the Rose Creek pack, a mother wolf and her daughter, and then an unrelated male wolf 10. And so it was a giant media thing. All the press people were there. They had a hidden acclimation pen. They had death threats against the wolves.
I remember in your book you described that actually there had to be armed Park Service rangers there 24 hours a day.
That's right. And that was in the middle of the winter, and they were the unsung heroes of the operation.
Totally.
But basically they put him in a pen that was maybe about an acre with chain link fencing, and then fed them a couple of times a week with animals that had been hit by cars and run over. So it was initially the Crystal Creek pack, and then the Rose Creek pack, and then a third pack later arrived, what became known as the Soda Butte pack. And their pen was located, maybe a half a mile from where the last wolves were killed, that Soda Butte Cone area I talked about. We had this huge overpopulation of elk, I think over 20,000,
right?
Mostly in that same northern area. So you think of wolves that specialize in hunting elk, they're looking through the chain link fencing every day for 2 months, and they're thinking 1, 2, 3, 4.
Dinner.
10,001, 10,002, 20,001. And they're thinking, maybe this isn't such a bad deal after all, if we can just get out of here.
If we can get out of here.
Yeah.
I did make a note of this from one of your books. You said that in 1995, there were about 20,000 elk in the park. And I think the accepted level for what they call carrying capacity is only 5,000 in the park.
Yes.
What is carrying capacity? What does that mean?
Well, it would be, let's say if you're a farmer or a rancher and you have a certain pasture or an area that is fenced off, you have to figure out, there's enough grass to feed on for, I'll make up some numbers, 10 cattle or 30 sheep. If you have more, you have a problem.
Right. They run out of food.
Right. Yeah. It's hard to believe this, but in my early years here, I had a retired park ranger that kind of volunteered to help me. And he was a very wise man. And he had worked in Yellowstone several decades earlier in his early career. And I totally get it if people would find this hard to believe, but it was the truth. He said every winter, headquarters would issue him a rifle and say, whenever you can, shoot a lot of elk.
Yeah.
We need to reduce the numbers. That was their management program.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, we'll just shoot them.
Yep.
It's hard to believe that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And after a while, the public really rose up against that. I mean, if you came with your family and a ranger pulls up and takes a gun and starts blasting away, your kid would be crying.
Yeah.
Daddy, why is he killing all those animals?
Yeah.
And, it's so anti.
Yeah. And
surface.
It's funny, too, because it's almost like a recognition that there's a problem.
Yeah.
There's too many elk.
Yeah.
But as you were talking earlier about how they refuse to see what is the obvious answer staring them in the face is return the environment to its natural state. 1995 was a very important year for wolves, obviously because of the reintroduction, but there's also a very important law enforcement case that comes up in 1995. You mentioned these packs that were brought down from Alberta, and one of them being the Rose Creek pack. Yeah. And you mentioned a Wolf 10. Yeah. Can you just describe that situation in 95 with Wolf 10, not before what happened, what we're going to talk about at the very end, but what was the family situation with Wolf 10?
It's quite the story. So I think I mentioned that pack, the Rose Creek pack, was in the same horse trailer as the Crystal Creek wolves.
Right.
And 6 in the Crystal Creek pack, but only 3 in Rose Creek, and that was the mother wolf number 9 and her daughter, a pup, number 7.
And how do you number? Why are wolves numbered? Sometimes they're numbered, sometimes they're not numbered. How does that work?
Sure. It's pretty simple. Any wolf that has a radio collar gets a number.
Got it.
And then, but that's only maybe 25-30% of all the wolves. We definitely don't want to give them a human type name like Ed.
Right.
No offense.
That's okay.
We'll give the best looking guy the name Ed.
Okay, that sounds good. That sounds good.
So, to be somewhat scientific, we would refer to it by something about its appearance. So there were 2 black brother wolves. One had a big chest blaze, the other had a small blaze. So big blaze, small blaze.
Got it.
Etc.
But then if they got a collar, they became a number.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And it would just be in sequence. We're in at least the 1500s now.
Oh, okay.
But getting back to Rose Creek, so we assumed that the mate of number 9, the mother wolf in the Rose Creek pack, had been killed in Canada.
Okay.
They couldn't find him, couldn't catch him if he was alive. So a single mother with 1 pup, not much of a pack.
Right.
But they caught a lone male, a big adult, and he was called Wolf 10. And so they thought, well, maybe they'll like each other. So they were in the same horse trailer for however many days it took to drive them down here. So they would have got the scent of each other. There'd be vocalizations.
Right.
So let's say they would have had some awareness of each other.
Sure.
And the mother wolf, I mean, this is speculation, but, I think it's fair to say she might be thinking, gee, I need a guy. And there's a guy here. He doesn't seem to have a girlfriend. And maybe he'd be thinking the same thing. And so they put the three of them together in the pen at Rose Creek behind the Yellowstone Institute. And by the time they were released 2 months later, it was a family. So he was happy to raise a stepdaughter, whatever you want to call. And we didn't really know for sure at the time, but it turned out that she was pregnant by the time they left.
Okay.
That they would have come out of the pen in March. The pups had to be born in April. And I'll just kind of review what happened after that somewhat quickly. Unfortunately, when they were released, they decided to travel east for some reason.
Well, as you said, wolves don't know where the boundary is of the park, right?
And yes, unknowingly, they went past the eastern border of Yellowstone, and they were in a national forest there. And by that time, she was very pregnant. Gestation is 2 months, by the way.
Oh, is that all?
Yeah. And so she dug a den. She was getting ready to have her pups. And he was fulfilling his responsibility. He was the only member of the pack that was free to go on a hunt. And so he would leave the den area to try to kill an elk or a deer and bring back food. She was indisposed. She couldn't leave. And then once the pups were born, she had 8 pups. The first wolf pups born here since the 20s. So it should have been it was a time of great celebration. And then he was killed.
Yeah. Everybody's in the wolf program is biting their fingernails because they know she's outside the park and he's outside the park because they're radio collared, right?
Yes.
So in episode 2 of season 3, we are actually going to talk to the special agent with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service who did the very first wolf poaching investigation. And it was the investigation of Ten's killing.
Yes.
So it was kind of a tragic blow to the wolf reintroduction program because now you've got this new pack with brand new pups and you lose the alpha male.
Yes.
And how did they know? This is one thing I think is really interesting about radio callers. How did they know that Wolf 10 had been killed?
Sure. The transmitter is programmed with a motion detector that if there's no motion after a certain number of hours, the beats per minute, I think it doubles. So instead of beep, 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 it's beep, 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 beep. And so we do regular flights, oftentimes twice a week, just to check on the wolves. And I don't recall the details, but I imagine that one of the wolf biologists was doing a flight and got the mortality signal, and that set up a whole gigantic chain of events, which we can get into. The guy cut off the collar and threw it in a creek, thinking that will screw up the electronics, but it didn't.
Tell us what happens after Wolf 10 gets this mortality signal. What was the next chain of events?
So, from our perspective, we needed to rescue the mother and the pups. And so that's where Mike Phillips, who was the leader of the Wolf Project at the time, and then Doug Smith, and then other people came into play. So they went over to that area just outside the park with the telemetry equipment, hoping to get number 8's number 9 signal. But if she was in the den, that would probably block you getting it. You'd have to be very close to get it. But just in the interest of time, let's just jump to the point where they were able to find the den. Carter Niemeyer was a player in that too, if you know him.
I do, yeah.
So Doug Smith happened to be the guy because he's long and lanky. He reached in, pulled them out one at a time. There was one last pup. He just barely got that guy. So they brought him back into the park, and they put him back in the Rose Creek pen, which is behind the Yellowstone Institute. So it was the mother and 8 pups.
What happened to when the Rose Creek pack was first released from its what's it called, the
Acclimation
pen? She had a daughter. What happened to that daughter?
Oh yeah, that was number 7. She left and paired off with one of the male yearlings from Crystal Creek.
Okay.
And I'm glad you mentioned it, because then that became the Leopold pack. So Aldo Leopold, his statement in the 40s, maybe we should bring wolves back. That was to honor him. Yeah.
Okay, so 9's daughter that she arrived with from Canada broke off, formed her own pack.
Yeah.
And then 10 and 9 mated, and
yes,
they had this new litter of 8 that was, thank goodness, found and recovered.
So we were very worried that a single mother with 8 extremely hungry pups, it's going to be really hard for her to protect them, to train them, and then by herself dump them, go out on a hunt, and just one wolf trying to kill a bison or an elk. It didn't look too good, not very optimistic. And then something happened.
Great. This is a great story.
So, and I have to admit, I'm a little biased here, because this is about Wolf 8, the main character in my first wolf book.
You bet.
First Yellowstone wolf book. So he was the runt of his litter. And I knew from the biologists and the rangers that were involved with when he and his family were in the Crystal Creek pen, that he was bullied and beaten up all the time by his 3. They were the same age, that they were bigger and stronger. And so he really had a hard time. So he would be the little guy in school that, the bullies beat up all the time.
And so Wolf 8 started out in the Crystal Creek.
Yes,
pack.
yeah. He was one of 4 sons.
Okay.
So they were pups when they arrived. Now he's a yearling.
Okay.
Let's say the equivalent to a teenage boy, maybe 15 years old, something like that. But I think it's fair to say at that time, if there was any wolf that you would have assigned to saying, well, he's never going to amount to anything, maybe some pack will allow him to come in and feed, but, nothing more than that, just a sad story. So as far as we know, he had kind of become a lone wolf as I'll say a teenager. That kept him away from his brothers, who were the bullies. And I had been watching him prior to that, and I began to see, there's something about this guy that could really change his whole story. I saw him stand up to a grizzly bear and get away with it. The bear was like 5 times his size, and he confronted it and got away with it. So to stay away from his brothers, he just wandered around a lot, explored a lot. Probably he heard some howling from this new area. He didn't know that there were other wolves other than his family. So he went up there, and his timing was perfect because the family had just been released from the pen. So we think he got there, and for the first time in his life, he saw wolves that were smaller than he was,
littler than him.
He didn't know that was a possibility.
Interesting.
And I'm going to use the word compassion. Empathy kicked in, and he ran over. And when one dog wants to play with a new dog that's meaning they bow down to each other, that's called a play bow.
Right.
We assume he did that. Which was, hey guys, let's play.
Right, not aggressive.
Yeah, and so he played with the pups. He probably didn't realize it, but he was being watched by the mother. She was desperate. She needed a guy. And to be blunt, he wasn't the most likely candidate that was applying, but no one else had applied. She wanted one twice his size and, twice as old, and he wasn't that wolf, but he was there. And, there's that saying, what is it, 90% of success is just showing up.
Exactly.
He showed up.
And one thing I didn't know until I read your books is wolf families are matriarchal, not patriarchal.
Yes.
So it's the female that's kind of in charge anyway.
Yes, I tell that to all the women I know. Yeah,
yeah. Well, they all know that anyway. All the women we know already know they're in charge.
And all the husbands are nodding their head. Yeah, I get that. Yeah, but the way I say it is, if you're a male wolf and you're ambitious and you gradually work your way up to the alpha position in your pack, that's good. That's a nice accomplishment. Good for you. But all that means is now you're working for the real boss. Right. And it sure ain't you.
Oh, that's hilarious. So Wolf 8 and 9 end up forming a pack then?
Yeah, she was quite a bit older than he was. So he, in human years, he was a teenager and she was at least middle-aged. But boy, it worked. And let's maybe start the transition to the story of one of those pups that 8 had a special relationship with. And that was 21.
And we don't have time to talk about 21's adventures. Yeah. All I will say to my listeners is that, 21 became one of the most famous wolves in the Yellowstone reintroduction program. Mm-hmm. And his life story is covered beautifully in one of your books. Mm-hmm. To all my listeners, I cannot recommend Rick's books enough. They are a beautiful story of the wolf reintroduction program in Yellowstone. He tells 21's story in a way that is just captivating. Whether you are pro-wolf, anti-wolf, or neutral on wolves, if you want to understand wolves and their place in the environment in the Western U.S., you have to start reading Rick's books because they will really open your eyes about how wolves work and how they interact in their environment. And it's just it's a great way to understand wolf behavior and biology. One thing, before we wrap up, Rick, I want to just throw out a couple of things that I picked up during my time researching wolves and reading your books. When we opened this podcast episode, we talked about how Jane Goodall described you as the guru of wolves. This is astonishing to me. You recorded, I'm sure it's more now, but you recorded 15 straight years of observing wolves every single day for 15 years. Is that
not
right?
Every day, but probably back then I saw wolves maybe 95% of the days.
Which is pretty darn good. That's pretty darn good.
It wasn't perfect, though.
But I have to say, 15 years going out every single day, not missing a day, and seeing wolves 90 to 95% of the time.
Do you know what finally stopped me?
Well, no. Tell me.
I had to have a quintuple heart. What is it called? Heart operation.
Bypass surgery.
Yeah, bypass. Yeah, that was that.
Quintuple bypass.
Yeah, 5 of them. Yeah.
Well, you're lucky that you caught it and you weren't out in the middle of Yellowstone when something happened, right?
Yeah. I got through that. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So you still go out to observe wolves, right?
Yeah, I had my 10,000th day last spring.
Incredible.
And I keep track of every day how many wolves I've seen. I have a calendar here. So this was last month. The time I left, the time I came back, how many wolves I saw, where they were, what pack it was. And so I did add it up around the time of my 10,000th day, and it was something like 126,000 wolves.
That's incredible.
So let's say a pack of 10 one day, a pack of 15 another day, etc. Yeah.
Just for my listeners can't see, Rick just showed me his calendar. The same type of calendar I carry every day. I still love a paper calendar, and it's covered in days he's been out looking at wolves. So, it's really impressive, Rick. Another statistic I wanted to bring up is one of the things you mentioned is just in 1995 alone, which was, and you mentioned this in one of your books, 1995 alone, which was the first year of wolf reintroduction, you recorded 40,000 interactions with park visitors, which is that's incredible. That's a lot of people you're contacting in one summer and educating about wolf biology and the importance of reintroducing them to Yellowstone. That's a really impressive, it's an impressive feat, but more importantly, it's an impressive service. It's an impressive public service to the people of this country. So, I love that there are interpretive rangers out there that do that sort of thing. So on behalf of me and anybody else who cares in this country, thank you for doing that. It's a huge service.
Well, you're welcome. And that was because of my background was very different than most wildlife researchers, because I had been what the Park Service calls a naturalist for half of my career. So that was my job, talking to people, doing shows, etc. So, and because wolves were still a somewhat controversial species, we needed to explain what we were doing. But at a certain point after the reintroduction, you didn't need to go over all that stuff every time with every person. So then it was, hey, folks, come on over here. We have the Druid Peak pack. Look through my scope. That's Wolf 21. That's his mate 42, etc. That's 42's evil sister 40.
His evil sister 40. Yeah. I'll just tell everybody you have to read the book about Wolf 40 because that's a great story.
And so, I mean, what's better than showing people that are new to Yellowstone their first wolves?
Yeah.
And
you described many occasions where you actually had the feeling that you changed people's lives when they got to see wolves interacting with each other and their environment.
Yes, and this memoir that I have coming out in a few months, I quote Doug Smith, and he said something very astute that's very, very true. He said, facts don't change people, but stories do. So whether it's you or me or Doug himself, you could talk to your blue in the face about the ecological value of having wolves on the landscape, and it's all true. There's no doubting that, and that that accomplishes some good. There's value in that, but what people like are stories, and for example, the relationship that when 21 was a pup, he met Wolf 8. Who we knew was the runt of his litter, but to 21, this is the biggest male wolf he had ever seen in his life, because it was the first male wolf he had ever seen. So they became kind of best friends, so to speak. Once 21 was a year or two older, they would go on hunts together. They were like close friends, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But he always looked up to 8. He always admired him. You always saw him as well above him in the hierarchy. And it wasn't long before 21 was way bigger than 8, but was, very happy in being subordinate to him. And,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And this is in my book on 21. The thing that, when I saw this happen, it really made me think, there's something really extra special about 21. And he had just come back. He was still in his original family, meaning with 9 and 8. His mother had a new litter of pups this particular year. But one of the pups wasn't doing too well. It was sick with something. We don't know quite what it was. So it generally was away from the other pups. While they were playing, you would see this little guy just kind of watching from a distance. And so 21 came back from a hunt, and I'm sure he was exhausted and tired. They had been successful, he and 8. So he gave some food to his mother, number 9. He regurgitated to the pups there. And then he looked around, and I realized that he was looking for that extra pup. And he went right to him and fed him. But more importantly, just kind of hung out with that guy for a while. And, it's an emotional story even now for me to talk about that, but it would be like a kid that is sick, is left behind. His friends aren't paying any attention to him, but his big brother comes back, and his big brother wants to hang out with him.
Right. Emotionally made him feel better.
Yeah.
There's a number of occasions in your books where you talk about that. And that's actually the very story I was going to ask you to tell, was that story about comforting the sickly pup. And there's another interesting story that goes with 8 and 21, I think, and that is, I'll have you tell it, but I'll just give the setup to it. A lot of times, what you describe in your book, there's often conflict between packs, and that actually serves an important goal of keeping pack sizes in check for their carrying capacity with the number of elk around. But you described some instances where Wolf 8 and 21 both, I guess, for lack of a better word, cut some slack to a wolf they were fighting. Can you kind of tell one of those stories a little bit where 8 or 21 didn't kill when they could have?
Yes. And the best example of that, it would be 21's no good nephew, Wolf 302.
So there's always a good nephew in any good story, or a bad nephew in every good story.
So in 302, he had a problem, and a lot of guys have a similar problem. He was just too good looking, and the girls would let him get away with anything. Yeah. So when 302 grew up, so he was born to, 21's older sister and to 8's brother.
Ah,
so he came from this, great genetic background. So his parents were superior wolves that were, the best possible role models for an alpha pair. And then there was their son, who was the opposite. So when he grew up, his idea of a long-term relationship with a girl, 15 minutes, maybe. And that was kind of pushing it. But then he was getting bored.
I got it.
Time to move on.
Okay.
So, and he was apparently irresistible to 21's daughter. So he just got them pregnant. And then 21 had to
raise the kids.
His own kids and his grandkids. And 21 would chase 302 and catch him repeatedly. But 21 just had this code that, as far as we know, he never killed another wolf. He would just make his point and then, hope that he learned a lesson. But 302, figured out how to take advantage of that. So he came back mating season after mating season and did it all over again. And, I kept on thinking, why don't you just kill the guy and get it over with? If I was a dad, that's what I would do.
All right.
But he never did that.
Yeah, he showed a lot of empathy toward other wolves.
That's right, yeah. That's
and
right.
8 did too, I think.
I think 21 learned that from 8, yeah.
Which, that's just, you talk about stories, and those stories are just so moving and fascinating.
And the irony of all that stuff is that in many ways, 8 and 21 were kind of the opposite, because 8 was the runt of his litter, was bullied and beaten up. 21 was probably the strongest and the biggest wolf in his litter. But you wonder, well, without 8, would he have turned out the same way? Did he need 8 in his life to turn out the way they did? It's a fascinating thing. Would he have been a bully if it wasn't for 8? So I oftentimes say that 21 was the undefeated heavyweight champion. He never lost a fight.
Right.
But he never killed an opponent that he defeated. I don't think he ever even seriously injured an opponent. He just did the minimum.
Yeah.
It'd be like if you or I sparred with Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali in their heyday. Hopefully they'd go easy on us.
Hopefully they'd go easy on us, exactly.
Yeah. But getting back to 302, he always took the easy way out, kind of the coward's way out. So he had nothing to do with raising any of his pups.
Right.
He was back with his parents, and this is going to be a joke. It's not serious. Yeah. We heard that he spent most of his time in their basement playing video games. You know how those guys are.
Down in the basement of the den.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
So just to finish, can I say some more?
Yeah, okay. Please. I was just going to ask you, what else do we need to talk about? I don't want to keep you here all day, which we could stay all day.
Yeah, a little bit more on 302. So, I just figured, this is his life story. And when he got older, he totally turned his life around. And he became an alpha male, very much like his father and his uncle. And I don't want to spoil it, but at the climax of his life, which is the climax of the book about 302, he became one of our greatest heroes.
That's the book entitled Redemption of Wolf 302, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So, Rick, what do you know about the economic impacts of the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone? What kind of impact has it had on the local communities?
Well, boy, it's quite a story that we never really expected. Even for me, being around wolves in other areas, when I came back in the spring of '95 after the wolves had been released, my goal for that year, being a ranger in Yellowstone, having some inside information about where the wolves were, my goal was if I could see part of one wolf, one,
right,
that year, I'd be the happiest guy in the world. Even a tail.
Right.
Give me a tail.
That's the way I am now. I just want to see a movement.
Yeah. I would not have been surprised if I hadn't seen any wolves that summer. But my first full day, I saw the whole Crystal Creek pack, including Wolf 8. And as you know, Yellowstone is mostly open country. And so if wolves are traveling through, you can see them from the road, maybe half a mile away, a mile away. And then eventually some of them den within sight of the road, and you can see them raise their pups. So that was unexpected. And very quickly, some of the local folks, mostly men and women in their 20s, figured out, well, maybe we should start up some wildlife tour business, guiding services. And now we have a huge number of them. But the Montana State University in Bozeman, they periodically come down and do economic surveys. And they ask people, why did you come to Yellowstone? And so it used to be the hot springs, the geysers, all that stuff. Now it's the wolves and the bears, with usually the wolves being number one. And so they have a formula where we get now 5 million visitors a year. So they took what percentage of people say they came to see wolves, what percentage of the 5 million that would be, and then they multiply it by the average amount that a typical family spends here. And so, and they do that periodically every few years. And the most recent one, the figure is $83 million.
Wow.
Every year.
Generated by wolf tourism. Basically.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so you may have noticed as you go through the park, you'll see a lot of cars with the logos of their tour name, like Wolf Tracker is one of them.
I saw one of those today. Yeah.
And so it's a great way to earn your living. And no offense to other types of jobs, but before the wolves, let's say a normal family that had kids growing up, they finished their schooling. Really, the only jobs locally would be working in a gas station, a gift shop, a motel.
Right.
You clean rooms for visitors. Those are valid jobs, no offense on any of them, but they're pretty much minimum wage. Now you can start your own business, hire people, and that's a pretty good job to have. You get up early, you have some nice people, you take them out to see wolves.
Spend every day in the wilderness. That's a pretty nice job.
In contrast, sticking with some economics, I'm a Montana resident. And so I went to the hunting section of Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And the most recent time I did that was a little over a year ago. I saw that as a Montana resident, if I paid the fees and licenses and everything, I could shoot 10 wolves and trap 10 wolves. One person could kill 20 wolves every year. And the cost for that, for a Montana resident, works out to $14 per wolf. Now, on the other hand, when we talked about $83 million, we tend to average about 100 wolves at any given time. So a different way to answer the question, what is the value of the wolf? There's a pretty good argument to say $830,000
per wolf.
Yeah, for tourism. Plus, however many wolves saw people today. I was trying to say the other way around. Some days 1,000 people will see the wolves.
Sure.
Maybe 2,000 people.
Sure.
And the next day, more people will see probably those same wolves. So that's really begun to change the equations here. That, even the politicians in the past would be very anti-wolf. they're starting to see, well, maybe there's something more to this than what we first thought. I think I told you the quote from Doug Smith, didn't I, that facts don't change people.
Stories do, yeah.
Yeah, I always hesitate to say this because my involvement is not the point of this story. It's always women that tell me this. They come up and say, hey, I gave my husband, I gave my boyfriend, I gave my neighbor one of your wolf books. And after reading it, they decided not to kill any more wolves.
We need more of that.
Yeah, the last time it happened, the husband was standing there, and the wife said, something along those lines, and he kind of was looking at his feet, and then, when she finished, I looked at him, and he looked at me, and he said, "Yeah, that's true."
Well, that is a very interesting story, and I think that should make you sleep well at night, knowing that.
Well, I understand you saying that, and thank you, but I really, it's all the wolves. It's not me. I just tell their stories.
You just tell their stories. Yeah. But
yeah.
It wouldn't happen without somebody who'd been out there every day for 15 years observing wolves.
Yeah, but it's still their story.
It is their story. That's a very humble way to put it. But for my listeners, I'm going to put on my website a list of Rick's books that he's published about wolves. They're all good. They're all great. My recommendation, though, is that people start with The Rise of Wolf 8, which I think tells the story of Wolf 10 and 9.
Yeah.
It briefly introduces you to the demise of Wolf 10, but then really goes into great detail about the Rose Creek Pack and its success under Wolf 9 and Wolf 8 together as the alphas. It's a great place to start the Rick McIntyre series of books on wolves. Mm-hmm. Rick, I cannot thank you enough for sitting down with me. I know it was a little bit difficult to do the scheduling to make this happen, but this is the perfect introduction to my season 3. Next week, we'll be talking to retired Special Agent Tim Eicher, who will tell the story about Wolf 10 from the law enforcement investigative side. And from there, we will soldier on and learn more about wolf reintroduction and wolf ecology in the United States.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Nature's Secret Service is written and produced by me, Ed Newcomer, and is co-produced by the DHTV team here at California State University, Dominguez Hills. Follow us on social media and connect with us online at naturesecretservice.com.